Hey guys, it's your host Jasmine. Welcome back to another video, and I hope everyone is having a super lovely day today wherever you are in the world. Before we begin, please note that this video does discuss sensitive topics such as gun violence, loss of life, and otherwise upsetting details, so viewer discretion is advised. As always, I encourage you guys to take the time to understand this case and form your own opinion. Mariah Wilson. Who is she? Well, to her close friends and family, she was known as Mo. She was a 25-year-old elite rising star in the competitive cycling community. I mean, she was incredibly disciplined, dedicated, and just super naturally gifted in her sport. Everyone knew her for her warmth, her humility, and her incredible drive. She had a really bright future ahead of herself, and she was possibly going to become one of the best cyclists in the country, in the United States. On May 11th, 2022, Mariah travels to Austin, Texas for this really big upcoming cycling race known as the Gravel Locos Race. A little bit about it, it's a long-distance gravel bike race, and it's not an easy one. The route is incredibly challenging, it's really long stretches of road, so you have to have a lot of endurance for it, and there's a lot of rugged terrain. So you need to be a really experienced rider for this type of race, and you need to have a lot of training, years and years of training. So it really showed how dedicated Mariah was to this path of becoming one of the greats in cycling. While Mariah was in Austin, she was staying at a friend's house known as Caitlyn Cash. She was just crashing there, preparing for the upcoming race. The day before the race, she had plans to meet up with an old fling. He was known as Colin Strickland, and he was also a professional cyclist, and they were both there to participate in the race. But Colin actually lived in Austin, Texas, whereas Mariah was just visiting. So they decided to, meet up. It's been a while since they had seen each other, and he is also sponsored by Red Bull, and he's super well respected in the field of cycling. So obviously they have this really big shared interest and passion in cycling. So I'm sure they're just old friends linking up, trying to get to know each other and catch up, right? However, Colin's ex-girlfriend found out that the two of them had spent the day together, and it seemed like she wasn't entirely okay with it. Now, Colin Strickland, he's 35 years old, and he's a really well-known Texas pro cyclist. I mean, he was sponsored by Red Bull. And his longtime girlfriend was Caitlyn Armstrong. She was also 35 years old and a yoga instructor, as well as a licensed realtor. Now, it seems like they had a pretty serious, committed long-term relationship with one another, Caitlyn and Colin. I almost forgot his name. They had been together for around 2.5 to 3 years. They were living together. They even were working together. They actually had a business in trailer restoration. And Caitlyn also got invested in cycling on behalf of Colin. And this is pretty normal relationship stuff somewhat. Like, maybe working together is not for every couple, but being interested in your partner's passions and learning about it, I mean, that's definitely something a lot of people would want to do for their partner, right? And it seemed to be like they were in a pretty serious relationship, and other witnesses also confirmed this. But their relationship was far from perfect. They had lots of arguments, and it seemed to have been very rocky at times. In October of 2021, Colin and Caitlyn separated briefly. They had to take a break. They needed, to spend some time apart, figure out their own things. And this break lasted for around a month before they ended up getting back together in November. But during this time apart, Colin was actually seeing Mariah. So this is when they had first met. They had a little fling, like a little thing going on with one another. But apparently, according to Colin, them seeing each other was actually very short, like only a week or so, even though they were kind of getting to know each other within this 1-month span. And he said that it was mostly platonic between them, and they were mostly just friends hanging out. And Colin really quickly after this break reconciled with Caitlyn, and they got back together. And I don't know what you guys think, but that seems a little bit messy to me. A bit of a love triangle situation going on, but it gets even messier. So apparently after Colin and Caitlyn had gotten back together, Colin was still actively texting Mariah. Yeah, and maybe you wouldn't think it was that weird if they were friends, but he was trying to hide it from Caitlyn. He had Mariah saved in his phone under a fake alias, even though he said that their friendship was only platonic and they were just friends. And if that were true, why hide it then? Why put her name under a fake alias? Also, he was deleting the messages between them. I always believe personally, and I think a lot of people will agree with me here, that honesty is one of the most important things in a relationship, right? So why was he hiding it from her? Maybe because he knew that Caitlyn would be upset about it. And obviously they had been together for a while, so Colin has a pretty good idea as to what Caitlyn is like as a person. Perhaps she's really jealous. Maybe she would have gotten really aggressive, maybe a little bit obsessive. Well, when Caitlyn found out about this by going through Colin's phone, she told Mariah to stay away. She was getting very territorial over Colin. And after this sort of pressure started escalating for Mariah, Caitlyn was pestering her a lot and texting her to really stay away from Colin. Mariah ended up blocking her. And friends later said that Caitlyn said that I would kill her. On May 11th of 2022, just days before the Gravel Locos race, Mariah and Colin had spent the day together, right? They went for a swim at Deep Eddy Pool. Then after they went for a dinner, it seemed to be a pretty nice casual day, just the two of them hanging out. And then at around 8:30 p.m., Colin drops Mariah off at her place that she's staying at. And the electric lock on the door actually confirms the time of her arrival. That's how we know. And Mariah heads inside. She changes out of her clothes. She's getting comfortable and she's settling in for the night. Later that evening, at around 10 p.m., Mariah's friend that she's staying with returns home. And when she enters, she finds Mariah on the bathroom floor and there is just blood everywhere. She could see that Mariah was shot 3 times and she wasn't breathing at all, no movement. There was 2 gunshot wounds to the head and 1 on the chest, and obviously she was freaking out. She calls 911 straight away and explains the situation, telling them to hurry, to send someone over. There is just blood everywhere. Police quickly arrive on scene, and as they arrive, they can see that Caitlyn, Mariah's friend, Caitlyn Cash, not Caitlyn Armstrong, was attempting CPR on Mariah, and she was in a panic, trying to help, trying to do something, counting, and she's just like, I don't know what to do. I just walked in on her. So initially, on the scene when police arrive, they obviously have no idea what's going on. All they can see is Mariah's dead body on the floor and her friend frantically doing CPR on her. And she, at the time, was the only witness. And of course, they had to question her. This is standard procedure. They need to get more information on what happened here. So at first, the police maybe thought that this was a potential burglary, and they had found out that Mariah was visiting Texas because there was this upcoming race and she was a professional cyclist. And of course, she had a really expensive racing bike. I mean, these things go for thousands and thousands of dollars. Hers was around $14,000. I mean, that's a lot of money for a bike. So they thought, okay, maybe someone broke in and was wanting to steal her bike. So the first thing that they kind of did was search the area around the house, trying to find her bike because it was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't in the usual place that she would park it. And after searching for a little while, they actually found the bike in a couple of bushes just a little bit away from the house. But as they kept looking on the scene, they actually found no evidence of a disturbance, no sign of a forced entry. So they started realizing that this wasn't a break-in. This wasn't some, random attack. It seems like this was targeted. And emergency responders arrived really quickly to the scene, but unfortunately, there was nothing that anyone could do. Mariah Wilson was pronounced dead at the scene. So investigators began by looking at Mariah's immediate circle. Who could have done this to her? So they first checked her friend, Caitlyn Cash, the friend that Mariah was staying with and the person who first found her body. She was brought into the police station, standard procedure. They have to go through, potential suspects of the case and try to gather more information about what's going on and who Mariah was associated with. She was, of course, tested for gunshot residue, and she was pretty much instantly cleared of any suspicion. The detective even said that he didn't really think it was her, but of course, they have to do these things. It's, again, standard procedure, because if they don't do it, if this gets brought to trial later on, they're gonna ask yeah, why didn't you test this person and whatnot? As they had found no gunshot residue on Caitlyn, she was cleared as a suspect, and it was confirmed that she was not present at the time of the shooting. Caitlyn had mentioned that the last person that was with Mariah was Colin Strickland. So attention then shifted over to Colin. Due to his, relationship with Mariah and the fact that he was literally the last person to be with her, the police obviously had to question him. The next day, they head over to his house and they start questioning him. And of course, the police had to tell him, unfortunately, there's no easy way to say this, but Mariah passed away last night. Colin kind of takes a moment and just to take in all this information and process what he's being told. And he asked the detective, how did it happen? And they said it was a homicide. At this time, detectives were not trying to reveal too much information. Usually in cases like this, as we know, the less they say, the better, so they can try to see how the suspect reacts. Are they in shock? Are they crying? A lot of their initial behavior can kind of indicate a lot of things to investigators. And it did seem like Colin was in genuine shock, he had no idea. But throughout questioning with the police, he was avoiding a lot of eye contact with them. So it did kind of raise a little bit of red flags for the investigators. When he was questioned about the day before when he was spending time with Mariah, he insisted that he only dropped her off at her house and that they had hung out that day, but he never entered her home. He just went home afterwards. And forensic evidence did kind of clear him of any involvement in the murder. When they checked his phone records, that they could see the time in which he dropped Mariah off, he had left the residence and did not enter the home or stick around as he had claimed. So Caitlyn, Cash, and Colin were cleared, but digital evidence is really what helped shape the direction of the case. Investigators looked to cell phone activity, GPS data, surveillance footage to really help reconstruct Mariah's final hours, try to understand what happened that evening and the events that took place. And one piece of footage that really stood out to them straight away was this surveillance footage of a black Jeep Grand Cherokee was driving slowly around the residence at the time of the murder. And when detectives visited Colin's home to question him, they noticed that same black Jeep there parked in his driveway. But it wasn't his. It belonged to his girlfriend, Caitlyn Armstrong. The more investigators interviewed people in Colin and Mariah's immediate circle, a pattern began to emerge. Caitlyn had been long aware of Colin's past romantic involvement with Mariah, and friends described her as increasingly jealous. Colin himself also said this, that she could be obsessive at times. And of course, something that probably contributed towards her jealousy was the fact that Colin kept his communication with Mariah hidden, was saving her number under a different name, was deleting messages to avoid conflict. He himself said in the interview with the detective that he knew Caitlyn could come off as jealous at times. So it seemed like Colin was quite aware of her tendencies. I think to some extent, understandably, anyone would be sort of jealous if your boyfriend, even if you guys were on a break, were seeing another woman, right? Although Colin did claim that during their break, both of them were seeing people, and Caitlyn was actively on Bumble going on dates with men. And they were also sleeping in separate rooms. So it really seems like that was going to be the end of their relationship. So at the same time, yeah, maybe Caitlyn is justified in her feelings, but it also validates Colin because he was seeing Mariah when they were on an established break, and Caitlyn was also seeing other men, right? Supposedly, Colin had also bought Caitlyn a handgun, but this was apparently for self-defense. And we are talking about, people in the United States where carrying guns isn't necessarily considered to be a weird thing, especially depending on state. A lot of people tend to carry, and Texas is one of those places. Although police had found the shell casings from the scene ended up matching Caitlyn's gun. So ballistics confirmed a match. And at this point, they kind of had enough evidence with the ballistics match and the surveillance of Caitlyn's Jeep. They decided to bring her in for questioning. They needed to figure out where was she that night. Supposedly, Caitlyn told Colin that she was at yoga, but there was a gap in the timeline where she is unaccounted for. And when she was questioned about where she was and what she was doing, she kept changing her story, was a little bit inconsistent, and she just could not provide a verifiable alibi. The secrecy around Colin and Mariah's communication only intensified the tension in his relationship with Caitlyn, and it gave investigators the psychological context that they needed. And once they realized Caitlyn couldn't provide a consistent alibi and her car was seen near the house the night Mariah was killed, motive was no longer a question mark. It was starting to take shape. Within 24 hours of discovering Mariah's body, Caitlyn was brought in for questioning, and she was brought in under this old arrest warrant that she had for an unpaid Botox treatment. And it seems a little bit silly almost, because I don't understand why someone would not just pay for a procedure like that. But luckily for investigators, this was what they needed to bring her in, but not make her so suspicious of why she was being brought in. So it was kind of under false pretenses. And throughout the questioning, she remained pretty, stoic, a little bit tense, but was keeping a straight head throughout. Even though Caitlyn couldn't provide a reliable alibi, authorities realized that the initial arrest warrant was actually invalid because of an error in her birth date. So even though there was all this suspicion around her, she was unfortunately legally allowed to leave without detention. Despite this error though, they were still gathering enough evidence to maintain suspicion on Caitlyn and continue to build this case against her. At this point, Caitlyn knew that she was under the spotlight for Mariah's murder. They were starting to close in on her. So what does she decide to do? Run. On May 13th, she sells her Jeep for $12,200 in Austin, Texas, and the next day she flies to New York. A couple days later, on May 17th, a homicide warrant was issued for her arrest. The surveillance footage of her Jeep being present on the scene was a key detail that investigators needed to establish her in this case. Then the next day, on May 18th, she was spotted at Newark Airport, but there was no ticket with her name. How could this be? Well, what's crazy is that she used her sister's passport to evade law enforcement and flee to Costa Rica. Once Caitlyn disappeared out of the United States, the case shifted from a homicide investigation to a full-scale manhunt. U.S. Marshals took over, tracking every trace she left behind. But it wasn't as easy as they thought it would be. Caitlyn was settling into her new life in Costa Rica in a beach community. And I personally feel like this is a little bit of an old trope, people escaping to South America, especially when they live in the US, and sort of hopping the border to escape law enforcement and escape the consequences of their own actions. And obviously these people are trying to disappear in some sense, but why would they go to a country that is so close to the United States? If they were really trying to evade law enforcement, wouldn't escaping to Southeast Asia or literally a different continent work better in their favor? What do you guys think about it? I'd love to know. So Caitlyn was living in Costa Rica under a new identity and was continuing working there as a yoga instructor because obviously she has experience as a yoga instructor. That was her full-time job that she was doing back in Texas. So she continued that there. And she was really attempting to, blend into the community and create a new life for herself. She was trying to settle roots. She was making friends, networking, building connections with people. So it seemed like she had plans to stay there long term. And I think what's maybe great for Caitlyn in this scenario is that Costa Rica does have a big American community, perhaps because it's so close to the United States. So maybe that was one of the reasons that she decided to go there. Maybe that was an appeal for her because she had to, very quickly escape the country, and going to Costa Rica where it's known to have sort of establishment of Americans, it kind of gives you a sense that you're still home in some ways. You still have a culture that you're familiar with. What is super crazy about all of this is not only the fact that she escaped to Costa Rica to avoid law enforcement, but she also got multiple plastic surgeries to change her appearance. Yeah, this is like something completely out of a movie. And of course, this made it more difficult for officials to find her. Over the next several weeks, marshals started piecing together her movements. What hostel was Caitlyn staying at? The fact that she introduced herself as different aliases to different people. At one bar, she introduced herself as Ari, and to people at the hostel she was staying at, they knew her as Beth. Now, of course, these people didn't know any better. I mean, how were they supposed to know that this seemingly normal woman was actually using a fake name and wasn't who she claimed to be? But throughout all of this tracking of Caitlyn's whereabouts and where she was staying and who she was talking to, the real break came when investigators were able to lure Caitlyn by advertising a fake yoga instructor position, knowing that it would be the kind of job someone trying to, reinvent themselves in Costa Rica might respond to. And she did. She arrived to the meeting at what she thought was a job opportunity without knowing that she was actually meeting with a US Marshal undercover. The Marshal said in an interview later on that he needed to find a way to bait her out. Obviously, he couldn't just straight up ask her, are you Caitlyn Armstrong? And she looked quite different from plastic surgery, so they needed a way to confirm that this was actually her. Supposedly, he had spoken Spanish to her only, so she brought up her phone to use Google Translate, and he was able to get close enough to her to look her in the eyes. And when he did, he recognized that was Caitlyn. This is her. On July 21st, more than 6 weeks after she fled the United States, she was arrested. She was incredibly close to escaping and building a new life under her new identity, but it finally came to an end. After Caitlyn was captured and brought back to the United States and was in jail waiting for trial, she had a supervised medical appointment and she attempted another escape yet again. She climbed through a bathroom window and authorities apprehended her pretty much immediately. She tried to run away and scale this concrete wall, but she was captured straight away. So I don't really know what she was thinking, how far did she really expect to get? But I guess at this point we could kind of credit her for her determination to avoid consequences, but it really does highlight her instability and the fact that she is a continuously ongoing danger to everyone around her. The trial against Caitlyn Armstrong relied heavily on forensic and digital evidence. So we have the ballistic analysis, we have the casings at the crime scene that are linked to her gun, which of course is then linked to the murder of Mariah Wilson, so it's a very clear established connection to the crime. She also had her phone off during the time that she was unaccounted for, so during the time of Mariah's murder, and she was trying to avoid her location being found, but there was surveillance footage of her Jeep. There was also Colin Strickland's testimony, and he provided the context that investigators needed for their relationship that really solidified Caitlyn's motives for this murder. He was able to clarify a timeline, and his verified alibi especially ensured authorities that they could focus solely on Caitlyn as a primary suspect throughout this case. On November 16th of 2023, Caitlyn Armstrong was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury determined that she acted with intent, planning, and premeditation in the murder of Mariah Wilson, and her escaping not only to Costa Rica, but then making a second attempt of escape while in custody just all made her look really bad and did not help her case at all. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison, and she'll be eligible for parole after 30 years. In 2024, so just last year, Mariah's family filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Caitlyn. They were seeking $1 million in damages to cover burial and funeral expenses. And obviously, having a funeral for a loved one is not only an incredibly difficult time, but it's very expensive. Like, my personal opinion on this, I do find the funeral industry quite exploitive, actually. It's not cheap. There's thousands and thousands of dollars in cost. And of course, the incredible, extensive emotional damage that the family had to go through with Mariah being taken away from them. And the lawsuit was also an attempt to stop Caitlyn from profiting from the crime. And the suit was successful. Caitlyn was ordered to pay the family $15 million. But 3 days after Mariah's family lawsuit was filed, Caitlyn actually transferred her assets to her family, so her mom and her sister, as well as Colin. They were then sued for fraudulent transfer. Now, this is super weird. Why is she transferring Colin her money? They must have been in some sort of communication, right? I mean, we can only make this as an assumption. We'll never know for sure. But why would she transfer the funds to him otherwise? I'm sure after all of this, Colin probably wanted to, and probably did, cut ties with her. But if that were the case, why would she give him money? That's just all very weird to me. There was also a movie released based on the case, and it's known as Yoga Teacher Killer, the Caitlyn Armstrong story. Now, it's really sad to see in cases like this when the killer is sensationalized. And of course, there are parts to this case that are quite interesting. I mean, her behavior overall is super bizarre. Her escaping to Costa Rica, getting plastic surgery, the way she evaded law enforcement, her second attempt at an escape. I mean, it all just sounds like something literally out of a movie. And of course, yeah, it's interesting to some extent, but I don't like when it shifts the focus away from the victim of the story. Mariah Wilson was at the center of this tragedy. She was only 25 years old with enormous promise, and her life was dedicated to training, discipline, and she had a natural talent in cycling. She didn't want to be a part of anyone's drama or a love triangle. She wasn't the one who created the insecurity that fueled Caitlyn. She was simply in the wrong orbit of two people whose relationship was already crumbling, and because of that, she lost her life. Her story is a permanent reminder of how quickly insecurities and jealousy can escalate into tragedy, and how the actions of others can take away a future that should have belonged entirely to her. So guys, I know that this was a heavy case to listen to, and these stories can really stick with us. So as always, please take a moment to check in with yourself and those around you. Thank you so much for watching today's video and for taking the time to learn about Mariah's story with me. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment any thoughts that you have down below. I would love to read them and know what you guys think about this case. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!